It is how we need to reposition ourselves as a sector to better take advantage of the opportunities that the situation will bring into play. And so, Mike, I want to give it to you to proceed from there. Once again, karibuni sana.
Thank you very much, Evans, for that quick context setting. And looking at the situations that we are facing as civil society and philanthropy, and particularly in this context that we are looking at today, I want to take this opportunity to welcome all of you, and particularly we want to welcome our brothers and sisters from the Civil Society Reference Group, who are going to present to us the scenario setting for the situation that we look at currently, so that sets the ground on which we will be able to get into a little bit more into depth around the budget process and what it means to us. So I wanted to welcome our brothers from the CSOs for their context setting of where we are as a country and what possibilities there are. So welcome. We want to give you opportunity, hopefully, to share your screen. I'm just enabling the screen sharing here so that you can be able to share. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike, and good morning, everyone.
Morning, karibu sana.
Yeah, partly I've been ambushed, but I've been, part of the part of the process. For the political scenarios, we had a consultant, a group of consultants that did this work. I believe EAPN was part of the team that met with us last week as we were sharing our findings on the different political scenarios. And so, at least for the benefit of the rest of us, I will briefly probably set the stage, and then I'll present the three political scenarios. I'll just be brief to highlight the core components of the political scenarios, but before I get to the political scenarios, it's just important to indicate that this is part of 2-year work that Civil Society Reference Group has been doing together with Poverty Eradication Network, CREADIS, and Ujamaa Center as a consortium supported by FHI 360. Now, the core objective, or the goal of the process was just to ensure that we have an enabling environment for civil society to take active role in the electoral processes in Kenya, but also to support the implementation or the operationalization of the Public Benefits Organizations Act. So the process began way back in July 2019. The project's actually coming to an end tomorrow. So we had a group of consultants that went around the country to just have a feel of what the people think about BBI reports, as well as what they think the role of civil society and other actors are looking at the different political scenarios. Now, Mike, I hope I'm in a position to share my screen.
Yes, you can, definitely.
Yes, so I will try to share this. And let me know if we can see the screen.
Yes, we can see it. You may want to put it on the presentation mode. Ah, good. It's good.
Is it okay?
Yeah, it is okay.
Good. Yeah. So currently, I mean, now the report that was developed, and I'll just go to the core components of the different scenarios. The report came up with the 3 possible political scenarios, which we are calling post-BBI political scenarios. So the first political scenario is the exceptionalism trap, which has been coined as system ya matapeli political scenario. In this scenario, this is the scenario where government uses COVID-19 and our normal debt as an excuse to justify an indefinite postponement of elections. And as we are looking at some of the core components of these political scenarios, let's reflect in terms of what's happening currently in Kenya. And I think some of these things have already started manifesting. Even as IEBC says they're not ready to hold elections in 2022. So one of the core components of the system ya matapeli is COVID-19 and debt become the best and the easy excuse to justify indefinite postponement of our general elections. And government weaponizes fear as usual in the name of maintaining law and order. To categorically deal with any dissenting voices, specifically probably from the, the teams that may be gearing up to take up some roles in the 2022 general elections. Now, just to ensure that they deal with county governments from dissenting, county governments are therefore promised resources conditional to efficient and effective service delivery, and so that means that government then has has the county government bosses and politicians in their pocket. Third is that because as we indicated that we have debts and COVID-19, we use all the different excuses to just ensure that now we don't have the referendum, that is the BBI or the constitutional amendment referendum, and so we abort the referendum, and possible handshake, a second, this now becomes the second possible handshake to just ensure that we have we quench political temperatures. Remember, at some point we were using, the government was using the security and the police and to just ensure that they deal with dissenting voices. But if this persists, then higher chances of political realignments and handshakes are used to quench political temperatures. Remember, the elections have just been postponed indefinitely. And so there are continued negotiations with the AU and the UN and other international intergovernmental bodies to support Kenya, which is now at this stage very broke, to just secure a grant that can help the country manage elections beyond 2022. And we have used 2025 as a year that is beyond 2022. So we have negotiations with the UN and AU that supports Kenya to just ensure that we have funds for elections. In these political scenarios, there is massive apathy by citizens who feels that the economy is dominated by merchant politicians. They are not benefiting. They've been moved to the margins, and so even as elections are being conducted, we have marginal participation by citizens. And again, as we are presenting this, just try to imagine what has already transpired in some of the by-elections. We've seen very minimal participation by by citizens. And what also came out from this report was in that we have only 5% of citizens, which is of course very low. And that's just an imagination that we will have very few people participating in such kind of an election after an indefinite postponement by the government. Oh, just a minute. Hello, Mike.
Yes, yes, I'm here. Owegi.
I'm told that Katindi is available to make the presentation.
Oh, great.
Hello, Katindi, are you with us?
Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry. I think when we were about to start, my internet went off.
Ah, thank you.
Oh.
Yes, I was just. Yeah, so Katindi, I just made the. I was just in the first political scenarios, which now I'm sure you can effectively just. You could do an overview, or you could just continue. But I'm handing this back to you.
All right.
So that you can proceed. Yes. Thank you.
I will be on standby just in case I have internet issues, and then you can pick it up. But I'm ready to present. So
thank you so much.
Sharing, if you stop sharing, I can share my screen.
Okay, let me just stop that.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Owegi, for standing in. All right. Good morning, everybody, and sorry for the confusion. I'll just quickly go into the presentation. As Owegi may have mentioned, a minute. Yes, this work was done by these organizations that you can see. We have a video, so we won't belabor the point. And some of the things that have been said by Owegi will be sort of like said in the video. Michael and I were the consultants, and as you have seen, Owegi's organization, Ujamaa, PEN, and Creadis were partners in this meeting. Now, the second thing I think that is important to note as we see the scenarios, and the reason why this introductory part is important is because we don't want anybody to misunderstand what the work was about. These are not predictions. These are looking at probabilities for the future based on the system that we live in Kenya and how it interacts and what it is likely to produce. And so the assignment was to facilitate what we call public interest scenarios. And we were looking mainly at the issue of BBI and how it will affect the next 5 years, as well as Kenya's elections, is one of the activities that is going on within the next 5 years. Now, in talking about this, I think it's important to clarify that futures thinking is really just thinking about what could happen with what you have right now. And the idea for it is to consciously monitor that external environment. You want to understand the possibilities that could occur, but more importantly is to ask yourself, if these things were to happen, how would I strategize? And so it should help you to be a bit more prepared. Now, in terms of also what we want to do with this work is to process full implications of some of the issues that are likely to happen. And then, of course, we want to help people to be a bit more prepared. We want to help people to challenge assumptions. And I think those will come out in the questions that we shall have. We will also want to ensure that people have a bit more fresh thinking about underlying issues that we often ignore, and because of our linear thinking as well. And we want to help people prepare for change. Now, because this is covered in the video, I'll not go into it, but any scenarios process has things that you identify that we feel may sort of like define how the future goes. So some of these are, as you can see, voting patterns of people, management of the culture of reform, things around the big youth numbers that are going to be voting right now that may not understand the history of our democracy. And the question to ask is, what is in their psyche and what will influence them to vote a certain way as opposed to another? So there are many of this, and Those will come out in the video. But the most important thing we want to do is to ensure that everybody understands that the personalities. So of course, as you do scenarios and as we present them as stories, we put in characters, we try and make it as a story that one can identify with. Now, if we say someone is gonna be president, we don't mean that we are predicting that is the case. What we are saying is that the underlying system and what it produces, anybody who takes that place is likely to have the same results. So the personalities we have put on those stories are just placeholders. Please listen into the story itself and how it pans out, not so much who did what and however, those are just placeholders. I think the second thing, we were presenting this to crowds that are also not necessarily Kenyan. And so because we are using, common phrases that people use, colloquial language and so forth, one of the things to say is that we've used names that represent the scenarios, what the scenarios is saying. So system ya matapeli is basically a scenario where we are talking about a system that is driven by scammers. And then utadu scenario is what can you possibly do because you have a system that ignores key stakeholders like citizens and their role in governance. And then the last scenario is called Wajinga Nyinyi, which means you foolish ones. And it is a scenario where we are pretty much disintegrating as a country. So these scenarios are conversation starters, and we're using them as a framework to create debate and to help people expand their thought process. And so please listen into the video. I'm hoping that there won't be any internet interruptions, and then let's have a debate later on.
Thinking about what could happen in the future is not an uncommon practice. We do so to make sense of the world actuality, but also to plan on better future outcomes.
Recognizing that every election in Kenya is viciously contested and brings with it heightened uncertainty, civil society reference group Poverty Eradication Network, Ujamaa and CRADIS came together to commission a scenarios building exercise to understand this complex battlefield before the battle fully starts.
Their aim was to understand possible futures Kenya could face in the next 5 years, given the uncertainties around the proposed constitutional amendment through the Building Bridges initiative, as well as the 2022 elections. Through a dynamic process of reviewing relevant literature, countrywide regional consultations, key informant interviews, and the scenarios building workshop, they identified key driving and restraining forces that will determine how the political and governance space might evolve.
In our view, these driving forces include, but are certainly not limited to, people's outlook on BBI, the process and the outcome of the referendum, the campaign period, which includes levels of elite control and organizing ethnic-based politics, patronage and clientelism, management and culture of reforms, management and the outcome of the 2022 elections, voting patterns influenced by the political culture, mythology and related symbolisms, as well as a big number of youth voters oblivious of the democratic history of Kenya. Election outcomes, the extent to which it bridges the trust deficit, and the subsequent responses of citizens, political elite, and security agencies. The actions and decisions of critical institutions within and without. The application of the law and the ends it achieves. State of the economy and who controls it, including issues of debt, trade, sectors of the economy, taxation, service delivery, cost of living, inequality, and chronism, technology, and more specifically its deployment during elections, the extent it is used to control or securitize, as well as its influence on information dynamics, the role of big data.
In addition to these factors, the decisions key stakeholders will make and the circumstances under which these decisions will be made are critical in shaping the possible outcomes of the next 5 years.
System Matapeli scenario is a story of class exceptionalism where continued dynastic control perpetuates peace at all cost narratives that privilege the economy over politics and instrumentalizes the law to deregulate the economy and asset strip the country of public resources. Use of data to camouflage a weak economy and the use of technology for privatized delivery of services presents the illusory veneer of efficiency and effectiveness. This easily hoodwinks the younger population and the middle class into receptivity of the status quo on account of accessing the tokens that gratify their illusions of grandeur.
In this scenario, the handshake and the referendum are bought. Raila and Ruto join forces and build momentum on a campaign against what they refer to as politics of cyclical betrayal, but both steer clear of their diametrically opposed BBI positions. Kamwana and his Sacred Alliance anoint Gideon Moi as the successor, a move that sparks fierce nationalist political narratives, including a rekindling of regional secessionist discourses between the Central Republic and the People's Republic. The government weaponizes fear in the name of maintaining law and order to deal with any dissenting voices. Under these acrimonious circumstances, COVID and debt become the easy excuse to justify an indefinite postponement of the elections. With the help of a UN and an AU mediation process, a broke Kenya secures a grant to manage the 2025 elections under stringent conditionalities, among them engaging a foreign independent company, Shared Inc., to run the elections. The move not only displays the prospect of a fair and transparent election, but one that is executed with unparalleled precision and which declares Gideon Moi the fifth president.
Unfortunately, investigative reports emerged suggesting that Shared Inc. is connected to the offshore business partners of the political elite and that they conducted Cambridge Analytica types of operations which fixed the election outcome.
Realizing wamecheswa, Kenyans pour onto the streets, but these protests are quickly neutralized when the two coalitions sign another elite pact to work together in a government of national unity, also known as Handshake 2 Reloaded. They selectively implement the 2010 Constitution and especially provisions that ensure the survival of the corporate state to accrue the greatest political and economic benefits. Privatization of public services in partnership with private sector bodies, big pharma, big data and big technology corporations hugely profit merchant politicians. The countrywide increase of internet access as well as effective and efficient framing of service delivery, even if privatized, keep citizens happy. The country's global ratings improve, and trade deals with Western countries enables us to renegotiate better terms of loan repayment, which is supported as long as we do not look eastwards anymore.
Debt rescheduling justifies Kenya to rack up more debt to pay off commercial loans and meet recurrent expenditure.
Despite heavy taxation and inflation, hence high cost of living, people generally get by because of increased income generation opportunities through the growth of SMEs, cottage industries, the tech, the gig, and the informal sectors, but at the primary level of production. Rising consumerism enabled policies, including availability of cheap personal loans and gambling opportunities, keep people busy working for a meager livelihood, seldom making any correlations between politics and justice, rights or public service delivery.
In the end, a passive and apathetic citizenry stand trapped on the margins of an economy dominated by merchant politicians. Indeed, all that glitters is not gold, because when rats bite, they blow some breeze.
Utadu scenario is a story of ethnic chieftaincy and elite-packed politics driving a highly indebted bandit economy. The system undertakes a successful coup against the people's 2010 constitution by opening up a floodgate of changes that undermine the Bill of Rights, devolution, as well as checks and balances. The law is invariably subverted to manipulate and compromise independent institutions, and all bridges to meaningful citizen participation are burnt. The only outlet of engagement is social media. In this scenario, IEBC is funded and hurriedly staffed with political cronies and intelligentsia before the BBI duo force a referendum in the late 2021 that intimidates, coerces, and bribes voters to endorse the passing of BBI, albeit marginally, due to a spectacular low voter turnout. The central theme of the referendum is Berbiro Irwa, euphemism for goodness is coming our way, a campaign plank of electoral mobilization in the run-up to the 2022 elections. Dysfunctional political parties overridden by personality cults and regional kingpins aid bandwagon politics to determine which way people vote in the name of protecting what is theirs. Politics of cooptation in order to share the national cake take center stage, There is rising anti-Kikuyu sentiments alongside counter-narratives that bash Rao and Luos as enablers or guarantors of Kikuyu hegemony. With the government banning physical campaigns due to COVID-19, other ethnicities use regional media stations to escalate the debates of skewed distribution of resources, including political positions.
The usual political interference and the old unimaginative electoral malpractices of procurement scandals, registration of ghost voters, voter bribery, slopely executed elections, ballot stuffing, IT manipulated results and conflicts dog the elections. Raila is declared president and Uhuru is named prime minister, a situation akin to Russia's Putin-Medvedev democracy between 2008 and 2012. Persistent peace campaigns urging citizens to accept and move on.
Heavy military deployment in opposition strongholds and the Berbiro Irwa for Orinewito factors suppressed the anger amongst those who feel the results did not reflect the will of the people. Majority of Kenyans are, however, grateful that the election was without as much violence as was predicted by analysts. The government undertakes a successful coup against the People's 2010 Constitution by opening up a floodgate of changes that undermine the Bill of Rights, devolution, as well as checks and balances, hence burning all the bridges to meaningful citizen participation. The security sector, the judiciary and legislative decision-making are also captured by the executive, invariably subverting the law to manipulate and compromise independent institutions.
The fourth and fifth COVID-19 waves, as well as numerous natural disasters, have worsened people's economic situations, resulting in numerous unga or fuel uproars. There are now thousands of economic migrants fleeing to rural areas and to UAE countries, including multinational corporations relocating to more peaceful neighboring countries.
Outraged by the state of affairs, citizens actively use social media to access more authentic information, demand accountability, and also spew online outrage against government vices like KRAs, hounding to pay taxes on non-existing incomes or the signed trade deals that are non-beneficial to Kenyans. The government's mtadu attitude bolsters state authorities to constrict civic space. They try to control KOT by introducing social media taxes, frequent internet disruptions, or slowing down internet speeds. But more disturbing is their decision to secretly swap data for debt when cornered by creditor countries. Civil society organizations and young people quickly adopt encrypted apps to conceal their online identity, as the online space is slowly and organically growing to form a spectacular uprising against the status quo.
5 years later, the more things changed, the more they remained the same. Indeed, leopards cannot change their spots. The Wajinganyinyi scenario is a story of total collapse of the country that is led by a demagogue and their nincompoop clique. In their contempt for order and the rule of law, they abrogate the constitution altogether and plunder what is left of the country's economy. Technology is deployed for surveillance of citizens who embrace alternative coping mechanisms to survive and in turn become complicit crooks, actively abetting the illegal goings on with the primitive adage that if you can't beat them, join them.
In this scenario, a huge unprecedented catalytic event in 2021 unleashes a strong public outcry that coalesces into a protest vote to defeat the BBI referendum. Dynastic politics become a particularly sore spot for the outrage and passion against the referendum proponents, thus uniting strange political bedfellows. The Tanga movement appropriates this resounding defeat of the BBI, which lends them a lot of traction. The state feels threatened by a possible Ruto win in 2022 and activates Chapter 6 against him to ensure that he's barred from contesting. This move catapults an unlikely demagogue candidate from one of the coalition members who replaces him as the flag bearer of the movement. The atmosphere is awash with fear, heightening insecurity and pockets of violence by 2022, but the 2013 ICC factor acts as a deterrent for outright conflict.
In the run-up to the election, people's discontent has surprisingly reached a crescendo. Ordinary citizens fed up with the outright gerrymandering of the elections by the state effectively set up parallel systems to to confirm the election results. The military personnel deployed were either unprepared for this kind of watchfulness from a largely barefoot, ragtag, and armed citizen army, particularly in government-friendly zones, or they are outrightly divided. It is clear that the people have voted against the government as opposition candidates floor their competitors, and the wild card candidate rides on this revolt to become Kenya's 5th president.
A renewed belief in the power of citizens and participatory democracy is palpable, having defeated the dynasties as well as having an untraditional politician in power.
The win is, however, short-lived as the deep state quickly regroups and reorganizes to recapture the remnants of power. The pain of losing control causes the defeated lot to discredit, undermine the legitimacy of, and instigate superficial crises to sabotage the winners.
Ill-equipped to formally run government and cash-strapped, the new government instrumentalizes COVID and other natural disasters. It also militarizes domestic politics and intensifies surveillance to safeguard their rule.
They shut down the internet and mainstream media to regain control of the country by grossly misinforming people who by now have found other virtual alternatives. A revival of ethnic and resource nationalism starts gaining traction, leading to a clamor for further fragmentation in this unstable coalition of convenience.
The demagogue, eventually abrogating the constitution, appropriates a few natural resources, like oil in Turkana, to get foreign capital and support, including arms. Life is unbearable, and citizens become complicit crooks, abetting the illegal goings-on to survive the chaos.
Corruption is at its worst, and institutions are mostly inefficient, including the security apparatus, which is unable and unwilling to restore order.
Big formal and foreign institutions relocate from the madness of the lawless society Kenya has become. In this mad world, only the mad are sane. In conclusion, these scenarios are not about predicting future events, but their value lies in understanding the structural changes that occur in the next 5 years.
They are meant to be conversation starters about how different groups can strategically prepare for these eventualities, including the upcoming elections, to avert the bleak aspects of each possible future while enhancing the good outcomes.
We implore you to use this work to challenge various assumptions, enable all stakeholders to have responsive strategic thinking, and to test preparedness based on these and other changes that lie ahead. What will you do if any of these realities were to occur?
What are the opportunities in each scenario?
What are the threats in each scenario?
What strategic options do we have?
What long-term decisions do we have to make to survive in any of these worlds?
So I don't think I want to recap because I'm sure time is far much gone. I probably will just stop here and ask us to just maybe have some questions, or let me take the meeting back to Evans and then you can give us guidance. Thank you.
Okay.
Dr. We want to thank you very much for this presentation of the scenarios. Just like you asked, what do we want to recap or not? But I already see a question on our chart. One member here is asking, James Getter is asking, do we have any positive future scenarios that we can also discuss? Well, that is something we might want to throw back to you, Dr. But as we look at these scenarios, like Dr. mentioned, we're looking at them as conversation starters. So Dr. I want to bring it back to you. So before we proceed from there, Karibu.
Probably if you could get a bit more questions so that we answer them in a bulk.
Aha.
Is that
That
okay?
would be great. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah. So we welcome more questions if anybody wants to raise, looking at those scenarios, like we said, again, we are using them as setting the stage for the discussions, particularly looking at the role of civil society and philanthropy in the larger context of development in this country and the role we play. So as we look at them, yes, Mr. Gatere has raised a question. I don't know if anybody else, welcome for questions. We welcome questions and even points of intervention where you feel you want to input here. Karibuni. We have the options to put them on the chat or just raise your hand and voice it out. You're welcome.
Okay, maybe as they think about it so that we also don't take too much time. To answer James's question, and I think it's one of the most popular questions we get. I think realistically, if you think about Kenya and everything that has been going on, 5 years is a very short time to turn around things and to really get out any positive outcomes. And so, I mean, as a facilitator, I pushed as much as possible to try and get us to be as objective and as optimistic as we could. But no matter how we tried, I mean, if we even gave you the reports of the regional meetings that were held, you know, whether it was in Mombasa, Nairobi, Garissa, you know, all of them, there was 90% of the responses were very bleak. And so this is the outcome of a very robust process. And I guess when you talk to people, I mean, the way we say vitu kwa ground ni different. When you talk to people, they feel a sense of fear, a sense of defeat, a sense of, you know.
It looks like you're frozen.
Is it better now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm saying that a lot of people, and I think what we underestimate is that we are looking at things from, can you hear me? Oh dear.
Yes, we can hear you, Dr. Katindi.
Oh, okay, because I can see my internet is freezing, it's sort of like becoming red. Okay, so yeah, so I guess when people seem to have, since when we opened the country to people starting to move in and out, it's like we've gone back to business as usual, but we forget that there was COVID. There are many people around, you know, the government was saying up to 75% were going to lose their jobs due to COVID. All right, so things have really been bad for people. And even if we probably have our jobs, the majority of the people who are also part of these conversations feel, you know, a sense of, you know, things are not going right. And so because of that, and even looking at past elections and the fact that it's been about the political elite, a lot of people see that things may not change fundamentally. And even if they do, like in the first scenario, they will do that for a certain class of people, not for everybody. And so I think we ought to take it not from the point of view also from where we stand and the privileges we have, but think about the whole country and think about the majority of the people and what they have to experience every day and what their outlook is. You see, and I think for me, what scenarios tends to do for me is to have a reality check from myself. Because when you're in a privileged part of society, one of the things we are is blind to the plight of what the majority, who are the ones who are going to make those electoral decisions, are making. So, but there are aspects in every scenario that are positive. For example, in the first scenario, you realize that yes, there's efficiency. And I think in the first scenario, the misnomer there is not to say that privatization is necessarily bad, but I think what we are, in that scenario, we are saying is that extractive way of you know, of leadership or of provision of services is, and where people don't have rights, because those rights are clawed back so that they can enjoy some privileges, I think is what we are trying to sort of like push back on. And so there are aspects within, like in the third scenario, even if it looks so bad, you can see the fact that it's a vote against the status quo. It's a spirited effort by people to actually say, you know what, we matter and we make decisions. Unfortunately, in that scenario, what we are also painting is that the status quo, the dynasties or the deep state will, because they are privileged by how the system works now, they are going to push back. They are moneyed, they have the power, And so when they push back, to what extent can citizen participation and citizens, change mechanisms really hold for long? And so the point to make here is that look for the different, positive aspects in the different scenarios, but also ask how as groups can we organize to sustain what we want to see and to really have a strategy about what we don't want to see. That's my long answer to James.
Thank you, Dr. Ari, for that long answer. And I believe as we go along, as we move into the second presentation, we will be able to put some of these things into context, because again, we are asking the groups here, the organizations here, to look at this as a basis on which we are looking towards the future and the place of civil society in philanthropy in the entire ecosystem.
Yeah.
At this point, I want to welcome our CEO again, Mr. Okinyi, to give us some tidbits on how the current budget that has just been read in this month, how some of these things are affecting our operations as philanthropy and civil society. And then we will see how we tie in with these scenarios that we have set here today. Welcome, Mr. Okinyi.
Thank you, Mike. And Dr. Katindi, whenever you talk about these things, it leaves a lot of questions and a lot of responsibilities on organizations like EAPN and others to really lead some conversations and discussions that will enable us as a space to be better prepared for, the possible scenarios that we are looking at. So we've gotten the perspective in terms of what the political future for the country looks like, possibilities, and couple that with the current pandemic that we are facing. I think one thing that I have to correct and really make clear is while we were in 2020, everyone was like, we are currently facing the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2021, most of the time speakers speak, people use past tense. COVID is still here with us, And so looking at that gloomy political situation, plus the pandemic and the issues and the challenges that it has come up with, I just wanted us again to link that with the short-term conversation around the budget that was read the other day. And then we'll get into a conversation around how do we prepare as a sector, as organizations who are in the civil society space, specifically philanthropy. How do we think strategically and enhance our preparedness as a sector? What are the opportunities and threats that we really have to discuss, both as organizations in individual level and collectively as a sector? What are some of the long-term strategies that we've got to put in place to enable us position ourselves better for the future that is coming ahead of us? And as EAPN, our role in this has been very simple. We want to build resilient organizations. We want to build resilient sector so that we are not always fighting fires, but better positioned and better prepared to deal with what comes ahead of us. I think having said that, we were to be joined today by KCB Foundation to just present to us the budget that was read the other day and what it means for us as a sector. But unfortunately, this morning, the KCB staff who was to make this presentation got an accident in Athi River, and so he is unable to make this presentation. However, I'll put on my hat of my economic hat and do justice to this session. Mike and Tim, how do I share my screen? So share screen here, and then this one. And then I think I saw the other time people being told, move to the right, down.
Yeah, the next one.
Right?
The next
good.
one.
Good.
There you are. Yeah.
Yeah, so so I'm presenting this courtesy of KCB Foundation. The conversation today was to be between corporates with the civil society and how we can, reposition our thinking and our strategies, looking at the political scenario ahead of us, the current pandemic, and the short-term view in terms of the budget and its implication in the work that we are doing. And so I'll not go into all the details about the budget, but I'll get into very few elements of it. In specific, we can see that there is, before I even get into what KCB has shared, we've seen a contraction in the global economic situation. And Kenya is not unique because of the occurrences and what the pandemic came with. All economies in 2020 and definitely part of 2021 are gonna contract, though there are some very positive projections, even for the case of Kenya, looking into 2021, 2022. So we see that for the sake of Kenya, we are seeing the government estimating the total revenue to be around 2 trillion, which is 67% of the projected expenditure. I think that is all I want us to pick from that specific slide. Looking at the 2021-2022 projections, we are seeing us projecting a real GDP growth for 2021-2022 to average around 6%, 6.2%, which is positive for us as an economy. As I mentioned earlier, the global economy is estimated to contract by around 3.3% in 2020, and for 2021, the projections is a growth of 6%, as we can see there. The budget, of course, we will share this presentation with you. You can see there the budget numbers. I don't want to get into that. I don't want to get into the recurrent expenditures, the development expenditures, those details. You can take time to have a look at them. I want us to look at the summary of expenditures and the allocations that we are seeing the government of the day working on, or rather proposing. And for the sector where we are, I would want us to look at, for example, the education sector, which is seeing a more or less allocation from what the government allocated the other year. Governance and law and order, which is very critical for the conversation that we are having today, having even listened to Dr. Katindi's presentation. And you can see a small, or rather a slight increase in terms of the allocation, considering that we are getting into an electioneering period. For the sector, specifically philanthropy, I also want to point out the health sector, and then you can see a slight increment in terms of the allocation. What is of interest, and even the conversation we are about to have shortly, is looking, for example, at the environmental protection, water and natural resources. One of my last meetings with one of our members here, I&M Bank Foundation, the whole conversation around climate change is very critical at this point in time for this generation and the generations to come. And so we would want to see the governments of the day in Kenya, in the region, across the world, really take this into perspective and really give it the attention that it deserves. I normally tell people that no matter how good we are with our political environment and all those things, if we do not protect our environment, then we have no country, no geographical, regions to govern. And so we see there a reduction in the allocation. And for us as philanthropy and organizations in this call today who are having an interest around environmental conservation, the climate change issues, this is an area that really calls for our action. The agricultural and rural development, we are seeing a considerable increase, and that is positive in terms of the budget figures that we are looking at. And so I wanted us to have a look at this. And probably one more slide before we get into what this means for us as a sector for the interest of time. Of course, we know that the government is planning to roll out, a post-COVID recovery strategy, even though this thing is still here with us. But that is the focus. The more the bigger pillar that the budget was pegged on. Of course, we have the implementation of the Big Four. And when I share this, you will see the allocations that the government has given on page 12.
Evans, we are losing you. Frozen.
Can you hear me now?
You may want to check
Yes, we can hear you. I think
We can hear you.
So, Catherine, what did you hear last so that I can start from there?
Well, I heard what you were saying all through. I think maybe it's being an issue from his side. Yeah.
Mike, it's
Yeah.
you. Thank you. That really has made my my moment over here. So you go to page, the page 12 for the presentation that we'll share, and you will see the allocation that the government has given into each of these. And for the philanthropy sector, and it's specific, the work that we are doing, and many people in this call today of interest to us is the food and nutrition, food nutrition security, and the universal healthcare. Most of the actors in the space that we are serving are there, and I'm seeing quite a number getting into affordable housing. And so that is of interest to us. And if I just go back a little bit, so we have the Big Four. The government is working on making the business environment more friendlier in terms of improving the regulations and the business environment as a whole. So the transformation that they're looking at into the economic sectors, another key interest for us as a sector, the structural reforms that they are putting in place to ensure efficiency and public service delivery, that again for us is important. And I think in this call today, we have the likes of Viwango, and we are looking at that pillar number 9 as a key pillar for us as a sector, and of course, by extension, the civil society space. And so page 11 is what I really want to focus on, and I'll be very brief because time is not on our end. And for the private sector and the philanthropic actors that are part of this conversation that we have been running, there's of course that concerted efforts from the government end, from our end as civil society, specifically philanthropy, to ensure and enhance that accelerated growth that we are looking at. And in this specifically, the private sector, and the budget that was read is having a lot of opportunities to support that specific dream. For example, the investments in the ICT. The other day, we just saw Kenya improving in its ranking in the World Bank, ease of doing business. That is critical for us as for the private sector players in this call, and even the corporate foundations engaged in philanthropy and the work that we are doing. So there is also big efforts towards increasing allocations toward the healthcare systems. The pandemic, of course, plus the challenges that we were having earlier, even before COVID-19. And so as a sector, I think there's more that we need to do in this specific area, because the situation and the circumstances really call upon us to do that. There is our preparedness as a nation, and of course the government allocated some resources towards this, our preparedness towards disasters. I think one of the things that COVID-19 has really done to us is to really open our eyes to really prepare ourselves to be more ready and more prepared when we face the kinds of disaster that we are facing today. And as I mentioned earlier when we were starting this call, I think as a sector, as the philanthropy sector, we have that opportunity to be innovative, to test, some innovative opportunities that we can, share and push with the government in terms of just ensuring that we promote that better preparedness and support all the government interventions that are there. I want to mention at this time that what is coming out of the budget that was read the other day is that there is a big portion of the budget that is going towards debt management. And that for us as a sector who are really concerned about the social well-being of the wananchi should be a red flag for us. Of course, we all understand how we got here as a country, the massive borrowing, of course, coupled by the pandemic. It's a totally, let me say, quote unquote, with very caution, understandable situation. But that is the situation, that is the reality. Focusing on it, I think, is not doing us justice. What we need to focus on is how do we ensure that the deficit that is left in terms of making better the social well-being of the wananchi is taken into consideration as we reposition ourselves as a sector with the activities that we are coming up with. The last research that we did as EAPN pointed out on the massive amount of resources that is going into the education sector. And even from the budget that you've seen, I think number 2 in that chart that I focused on, education still holds the highest budget within the sectors, but it still needs more to be done, even within the education sector itself, specifically with the rollout of the CBC to the high, what they're now calling the senior school level. I'm not so good with that space, but there is a lot that we need to do to that effect as philanthropy. There are some 4 sectors, again, from the budget that was read, that are least funded with allocations of 100 billion and below. And as a sector, I think these are some of the areas that we need to really focus our attention, even as we reposition. And one of them I'd mentioned earlier, the environment, water, and natural resources, which is very critical at this moment in time. We were conversing with our global partners, and one of the conversations that we agreed on that we really need to convene and bring like-minded organizations together is around this climate change conversation. And we see an allocation below 100 billion to that from the budget that was read. And that for us is an area and an issue that we need to really focus our attention. Number 2 is, of course, agriculture, rural and urban development. Again, for us, that is something that we need to look at. The other sector is the social protection, culture and recreation space that we as philanthropy actors have been in for the longest time that I've known, and we need to again look into. And then lastly is the economic and commercial affairs, which is critical for the development and for the growth of the social well-being of the people that we serve. I think it is also important to note that as Dr. Katindi mentioned, we are heading into an electioneering year. And so there's significant growth. So there's that significant growth that we saw in terms of the public administration and international relations from the allocation that we saw in the budget. But as civil society, I think we have a critical role. I think a role that we've always played very well during, after, and before the electioneering period in terms of civic education. And so as a sector, I think there is a lot that we really need to look into that specific conversation. And so the philanthropy sector, therefore, has an uphill task, if I can use that word, in service delivery in this coming fiscal year. Civic education, health, agriculture, economic affairs will be at the helm. And there are definitely gaps that we are seeing. And this, for sure, call for our action. And so, Mike, I want to stop there for now and really challenge us that we will be having some of these conversations going into the future on how, as a sector, as a space, as actors within the civil society space, how do we bring our minds together in a collaborative manner, breaking the silos that have always impaired our work and pulling together towards addressing some of these issues that we are talking about. Corporate philanthropies, the community philanthropies, philanthropy from all the angles that we can look at. We have a role to play looking at the period ahead of us in terms of politics, the pandemic that we are facing, and what we see as allocations from the government into these issues that we are grappling with. Thank you so much, Mike, and allow me get it back to you.
Thank you very much, Evans, for that pulling elements of the current budget. And putting it in context as a sector, the civil society and the philanthropy, that drives us into now the questions of what role we need to play, particularly looking at the gaps that you pointed out and basing them on the level at which Dr. Katinde has pointed out the possible scenarios. Then the major questions arise in terms of looking at our programming as civil society and philanthropy, the role that we will continue to play going forward in terms of ensuring that, one, the marginalized groups, the low-income earners, still survive through the challenges that are being presented by both the pandemic, but the decreased allocations that have been given to some of these areas. But two, we also need to grapple with the fact that the debt ceilings, the debt levels in this country have continued to rise. As it stands, we are told 70% of the GDP will go into a debt servicing. That means then, as we say, with the increased spending that is going to be there is minimal of it that is going into service delivery and development. Then that puts our organizations in very critical situations to start looking at our programming in terms of how we continue to operate in this new system that has been brought by both the allocations, but also the gaps that are there. Number two, the issues of advocacy that Evans has clearly alluded to, that our organizations have always taken charge of. What does it mean for us going forward? And three, there are all these infrastructure issues that are coming through. We can see the government has put a lot of money into infrastructure, but that is one side of the story. What is the other side of service delivery coming through from this infrastructure that have been put in place? How do we use this infrastructure to fast track the development of the people? Finally, I want to pose the question around the issues of the tax issues. It's very clear that from this budget, the corporate tax has risen from 25% to 30%. And the pay as you earn, the payee has equally risen in similar margins. That means, again, interpreting it in conservative terms, the income coming down, disposable income goes down. What does that mean, for example, for resource mobilization that is local, that we have seen come through in the last 1 year, that the pandemic has been ravaging through the world and through our country? And as Evans mentioned, one of our researchers early this year did allude to a number of our organizations going back to the local market, the local situation, and getting support for programming and support towards the fulfillment of their goals. When taxes rise, when taxes go higher, when there is little disposable income in the hands of our people, what does that mean for resource mobilization and even the fulfillment of our goals as we implement our programs? So I want to leave it here. I want to throw back the ball to all of us here as we go through this breakdown and try to put into perspective some of these scenarios and the situations presented to us. It means as civil society and philanthropy, we may want to go back to the drawing table. We may want to relook anew at some of the effectivity of our programs and how these budgetary allocations and the situations as they present themselves, what they mean to us and our work in this situation. I want to give the ball back to Catherine. She has a few elements that she has also pulled out to drive us as we come towards the conclusion of today's webinar. But that means you still have an opportunity to raise your responses, raise your questions, and contribute to this discussion, because as we said, we are beginning the discussion from this point. Karibu Catherine.
Thank you, Mike. I was kind of hoping that we would have a session for questions and answers before we could wind up. We are doing very well in terms of time. So I don't know whether there's anybody who has any questions, given the rich discussions we've had this morning. Okay. I don't see any questions even in the chat. I think a lot has been said, and I don't want to belabor the point. But what I'm hearing from my end is that the three things that come to mind is, number one, preparedness. As a sector, we need to be, now that we know the scenarios that are out there, it's good to start now planning and just being prepared for all the scenarios that have been put forward, and in so doing, come up with mitigation measures. And as Evans mentioned, I mean, when you talk, we've been talking a lot in silos and all, but maybe this is a time to actually come together and just see what can be done. When you look at the political scenarios, James was very right in saying, I mean, are there any positives? I think after listening to Dr. Katindi, if I'm not wrong, this is just for about 5 years, but then again, this will be 5 very critical years. So yeah, preparedness comes to mind, yeah. And of course, the other thing that comes to mind is supporting all the government interventions as we move forward. We've seen there are deficits in almost all the sectors. So we'll be called upon between now and then to bridge that gap. So what can we do? What are we looking at? Yeah, it's not all doom and gloom. Yeah, when we keep asking ourselves whether the government will borrow more to give more to the I mean, to pay for more debt. I mean, I know all these questions are worrying, but what can we do? And I think when we pull together, the little that we can do will go a long way in bridging some of these gaps. And I think that is all I had for Mike for today. Yeah. And I see there's a question from Pato. Pato Ochieng. Do you want to ask or?
Pato, you're welcome. You can put this
Karibu.
Please kindly voice it up.
I've just put it there so that we all reflect on whether philanthropy can reflect on where they were in 2007 and how we were caught with our pants down, and whether we should be at the same place come 2022, and perhaps whether in fact we are probably not worse off in terms of preparation now that the variables have increased, including COVID, debt, and so on and so forth. I think we are worse off, but I don't think we're confronting and looking at that situation. So it's just a reflection that I would like all of us to perhaps pay attention to. Thanks a lot.
Okay, yeah, and you're right, Patrick, because this I don't know whether we are worse off. I feel like because of the COVID, things may have sort of put us again up there somewhere, because there was a lot of a call for philanthropy to step in during that time. But then, yeah, are we really prepared? And maybe that's why we need this kind of forums to just sit back and just have these reflections and just see. And it's not just about now talking. No, it's talking from talk to action. As a famous person always tells me, yeah, it's move from talk to action. So I think this is the time to act. Yeah. Any other reflections, observations before we close on? We close up.
Catherine, if I may, this is Katindi.
Sure. Yes, go ahead.
Something interesting that what we are seeing is much more protracted, volatile, uncertain, changing, complex situation like Patrick is mentioning, more than the 2007, and that indeed we are reacting, and that's why the philanthropy sector is being asked to come in and fill in the shoes. But I think the reflection needs to go much deeper in asking. So there's much more need. So there's much more sort of like ask for philanthropy to come and step in, but that is going to be under very much more, let's say, difficult circumstances, because it is with less money, it is to handle more crises, and the question becomes, how do you prepare that, and how do you prepare for that and much more adequately, so that you're able to then respond with effectiveness, but also emerge stronger, because you won't be able to assist or to come on board if you yourselves are not healthy financially, or even in terms of systems, in terms of even ideas to resolve some of these conflicts that you have. And the question becomes then, what is the preparedness of the philanthropy sector with that in mind? Yeah. So it's not just the relevance, it's not just, yes, now we are being called upon, but what is the solution you're going to give with much more depth and much more longevity?
Yeah, quite a, yeah.
Hi, Catherine, this is Mike.
Okay.
Yeah,
We can't hear you very clearly. Maybe you need to just get closer to the mic. Mike?
okay. Can you hear me
yeah,
now?
there you go.
Yeah,
Yes.
so I want to make just a few comments because in this country it's difficult to take any budget seriously. Of course, we have huge budgets that are we live beyond our means. But in terms of the supplementaries, you remember when the MPs refused last week? Was it early this week? The one that was even going to tax things like bread and so on. But it becomes very, very difficult to budget for these things. Look at the counties. The counties didn't even get what they needed, yet it's a key aspect of devolution. Of course, BBI wants to give them more money. The question is whether they'll get it. There's a lot of money going into debt. In fact, debt is consuming quite a bit. So usually then you want to look much more at issues of taxation and debt, because that's what tells you what the impact is, rather, and then expenditure, whatever the Auditor General tells you 3-4 years down the line, rather than the budget, because the budget for us is a wish list. The money doesn't go out. Yeah. So by the time you add on aspects of corruption, that means that even if the money is there, was it spent on what it was supposed to be spent, or did it go to entrepreneurs and anyone else? Yeah, so that begins then to raise other issues. Yes, people have talked about elections and aspects of BBI that will have to come in and modify the budget. Yeah, those things affect things quite a bit. Yeah, but yeah, we talk about a budget, but in this country, yeah, it's just to to make us feel good. Yeah, but it's really hard to follow. Thank you.
And thank you, Mike, for that. And I think Dr. Kachindi just removed the words from my mind. You're just spot on that. And this also gets into the question of the reflection Don is asking, given the increasing demand on our resources as a sector, where should we focus our energy and resources? And I can give it back to the floor. Where do you think then, as a sector, where should we focus the energies?
Yeah. Catherine, can you allow me just to make another quick comment?
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
If corruption, look at Nairobi and look at our famous General Badi. Yeah, in a very difficult time because
we are losing you, Mike. We can hardly hear you. Come closer to the mic.
Look at Nairobi and the COVID situation that has hit the country. But look at our friend General Badi. Yeah, where did he get the money to put up the 24 health centers in slums and dig boreholes in slums and put in water? The work we've seen on the streets, the repaired cars and the vehicles that were, yeah. So if you begin to think about, what he's been able to do, in Nairobi, despite the limited resources he's given in a poor year, imagine what would happen if we had better management and use of resources on national level. So issues of education being underfunded, because little money goes there, yes, it's gone up, it's quite a bit of the budget, a little money goes there, but again, it's stolen by principals and everyone else. Yesterday, I was shocked even to learn in the University of Nairobi how rooms are being sold because there's a huge shortage, and people are asking you for 20,000 shillings a room. Yeah, so if you have only 100 rooms, you imagine, that's already 2 million. If you're in charge of 500 rooms, that's good money. Yeah. So Badi shows us that if we can tame corruption, yeah, the life of our people will improve. Let me leave it there.
Okay, and maybe just back to the question, I am aware of the time, we only have just about 5 minutes, but just to get some reflections on where should we focus our energies, maybe just another 2 minutes of just some ideas of where we should focus our resources, as limited as they may be. Yeah. Mr. Hirji, today you've been very quiet. Or maybe it's not with us.
Well, you are making me speak. Today I was a passive listener because this became a little bit of politics and all that, and I didn't want to indulge myself. I was trying to pick up the ideas of what will be the effect of the discussion we had on budget and otherwise on philanthropy. And it was difficult to balance the two. So that's why I remained silent, and I would remain silent.
Okay, Mr. Hirji. Evans, your hand is raised, and I hope you can also just quell Mr. Hirji's concerns about the interconnectedness of the two.
Thank you, Catherine. And I think I would want to state that the best way to always make a decision is to act on the point of knowledge. And in appreciating the role that knowledge plays in our decision making, we've got to appreciate all the components that come with this. In this case, we are in a unique time as a country and as a sector. As I mentioned earlier, you see the 1 year, 1.5 years ahead of us are very critical for our success as organizations, because we all know how elections and all that come with it affect the work that we are doing. I think someone just asked a question here a few minutes ago around how the 2007, caught us pants down. And so it is important for us to understand, and that's why a lot of investments have been put into the process that was shared by Dr. Katindi a few minutes ago, just to enable us understand what are some of the possibilities, what are some of the things that may happen, and should they go that direction or even not go that direction. The bottom line is we've got to prepare. And so having that on one hand and appreciating also that we are in unique times, even with the pandemic that we are having, looking at those two, then we've got as a sector to think differently. We've got to position ourselves differently, to be more strategic in our thinking, in looking at how do we make proper use of the little resources that we have for greater impact. I think that's the entire essence of this conversation. And so to move us forward, Catherine, one of the things that I wanted to mention and why I raised up my hand is there is a lot that is going into this process. And this is just one of the conversations that is kicking us off. And this conversation, as broad as it is now going to be devolved into sectoral working groups, which have been having series of meetings like education, climate change, disability, leadership, and governance. So a lot of these conversations in terms of how do we put in place systems that will enable us to be more responsive? How do we share ideas? How do we encourage cross-learning between and amongst organizations to enable us be more impactful with the work that we are doing? So these are devolving into those sectoral conversations, which will bring organizations of like minds working in same sectors to just see and answer, for example, the question that someone had put on the chat around where do we focus our efforts. As general as we are now, that may be a difficult question to answer, apart from general efforts like I'm about to mention shortly, but specific efforts in terms of specific sectors of interest to specific organizations. We are moving those conversations to those learning or rather working groups. there are issues of general interest for us as a sector. And I think one of them, which I will not hesitate to talk with all the energy that I have, is that time has come for us as sector players, as actors in the civil society space, to pull together our efforts so that we can be more impactful. We are going to get it difficult if we have to, work in silos and probably, shield a few things here and there. We've got to pull together. We've got to work together. If we are going, for example, to push for the voice of the civil society space to be heard, specifically in this interesting time ahead of elections, then we've got to pull ourselves together. We've got to speak as a sector. We've got to be united as a sector so that our collective efforts can yield fruits that will be very important and critical for the work ahead of us. The enabling environment conversation, I think I don't want to close without speaking about it, that we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility as sector players to support the respective organizations, have an environment where they can work in a more impactful manner. And so, having already passed the time by a minute, Catherine, allow me stop there as we bring this very important conversation to a close and move on to the other conversations that will be going on beyond these ones into those respective sectors, bringing together the organizations with common interests to enable us move together and see what we need to focus on. So Mike, you can close, and I want to appreciate all of you for your time, contributions, and making this a success. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you very much, Evans. As you close, we have had a bit of discussions in the chat. Quite a number of things have come through. James did raise a very critical question in terms of where we are going. And it's good you've offered direction that as we look towards the future and our position within the country and the national development, we need to start thinking of what should be the focus of our key areas. So going forward, you pointed out that looking at the sectoral approaches that we are going to take at the learning groups would hopefully help us now forge ahead in terms of our response to the kind of question that has been raised here, but also the entire understanding of where we are going as a sector. Two, it has come very clearly that partnerships and collaborations at the level of the civil society and philanthropy, that we become a principal partner to government. It's very clear that we need to be able to bolster our position as a critical partner, not just to government, but then to the society as well, that we can stand in between and be counted. We want to take this opportunity to thank each one of you for having participated in these discussions today. This is only a beginning. And as we started the discussions today, we want to urge you to join us in the next level. That will be at the learning groups and the sector-wide responses that we hope to start putting together towards the general understanding of the position of the civil society and the philanthropy, such that once again, we will remain united in our push for the good of society. Thank you very much. And we hope that as we move forward, you will join us at this next level. And we invite you to bring your contributions and perspectives that we have shared here today. And we look forward to your participation once again. Thank you very much. We wish you well, and we wish you a fruitful day that is remaining. Asanteni sana.